Thank you very much for joining us today, this beautiful venue, as we're here to explore the visual and material legacy of Christianity in China from the 17th century to today. Now, once again, this is the Faith and Forms Pagoda Odyssey International Conference. Once again, thank you for joining us. Once again, my name is Leslie Liu. Happy to be the MC for this session today. Now, this international conference and also the Pagoda Odyssey International Conference is organized by the Asian Civilisations Museum. And on behalf of ACM, a big thank you to all of you for joining us today. Now, so yesterday, we explored two panels. First, Chinese Christian art in context, and the second, the impact of Christianity on Chinese material culture. Now, our first panel of the day, which is the third panel of our international conference, and a lot of you had questions yesterday as well, and we're going to explore them today. Basically, the Tushanwan workshops, the cradle of modern Chinese art. Now, before we officially begin as well, a gentle reminder to all guests to please kindly switch your mobile and other electronic devices to the silent mode. Also, for our guests who just joining us for the first day today, now the restrooms located outside, up the stairs towards your right-hand side. Now, one more thing also, now with regard to our sustainability efforts, now we have done the program in an e-version. So you can scan the QR code on the screen to download the program for today. Now, they can also be found in the program booklet within your conference folder as well. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, the Tushanwan workshops, the cradle of modern Chinese art. I'd like to introduce our moderator for the next 4 sessions. Now, she's Dr. Patricia Yu from Kenyon College. She was a presenter yesterday as well. Now, she will be moderating the Q&A for the next 4 sessions. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome Dr. Patricia Yu, please.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Without too much further ado, we're going to begin with the first presentation, Networks of Beauty, Financing, Producing, and Exhibiting Chinese Catholic Art in 19th Century Shanghai. Our presenter is a postdoc research fellow at the Department of Art History in the University of Zürich. Now, he has lost his voice a little bit this morning, so I will be providing some of the voice of the quotations of his show. So without further ado, let us please welcome Dr. Antonio de Caro.
Thank you very much, everybody. It's truly a pleasure to be here today. I'm really sorry for my voice. I wanted to start by saying that I wanted to give voice today to Jesuit missionaries, orphans, and who were in Tushanwan, but I understand that now it sounds a bit funny. Nevertheless, I really thank you for your attention. I'm very grateful for the very kind invitation by Kevin Lam and Clement On and all the staff who have been extremely kind to me and to all of us, and I'm grateful for the presentations what have been done and will be done later on. So the topic of today's presentation will be Networks of Beauty, Financing, Producing, and Exhibiting Chinese Catholic Art in 19th Century Shanghai. So I would like to start by telling you a story of an Italian missionary who arrived. His name was Luigi Sica, or Luigi Sica. You can see him here in this photograph. And he actually arrived in Shanghai in 1846. 1 year later, after he arrived, he wrote a report to Italian missionaries in Rome in order to explain the difference and the visual differences between the early modern missions in China and the contemporary ones that he encountered. And I quote,
At present, in China, the great distinction in clothing styles that Ruggieri and Ricci found upon their first arrival is no longer kept. Apart from a few small distinguishing features, scholars, mandarins, and all other people, indeed even the common folk, dress in the same fashion, though the quality of the material varies according to rank, much as it does in Europe. The shaving of the head and the arranging of the queue are done by Chinese barbers, who are extremely numerous and highly skilled. They use razors that are half as short and twice as wide as ours, yet cut excellently, requiring only a simple strip of cotton cloth for sharpening. As for beards, we generally do not shave ourselves, but have them shaved entirely, leaving only a small tuft on the chin, mosca, and mustaches.
Yes, so now you can actually see the style in Angelo Zottoli, who used both the mosca and the mustache here. Sika chose later in his life to abandon this cool style by adopting a longer beard. And I think that like looking at the visual aspect of European missionaries and also their habits, like the adoption of the queue, helps us to understand a little bit more also visually how these encounters happened. So my talk will be divided into 3 parts. In the first part, I will be talking about the commerce of faith, producing and selling Chinese Catholic artworks. Then I will be delving into the production of Christian artworks in Shanghai and Tushanwan. And then I will be talking about exhibiting artworks produced in Shanghai with a controversial exhibition in Naples done in 1934, in which those artworks are somehow appearing again. So let's start with the first part. Adolphe Vasseur was a crucial French Jesuit missionary who actually produced hundreds of woodblocks, which serves as blueprints not only for Tushanwan, for the Tushanwan workshop, but also for Japanese-produced images as well. And it's been demonstrated by recent scholarship. He also was very much in need of money, and so he asked the Father General of the Society of Jesus financial support for his enterprise. And as you can see in the table, he offered to the Father General a very detailed pricing for all the artworks that he was meant to produce. And I quote,
This inexpensive execution helps us understand the formal condition of the work due to its affordable prices. The 3 prices shown correspond to 3 methods of execution. The first has simple, plain colors. The second has flat colors corrected by retouching. The third has a full-scale painting according to the best techniques.
Thank you. So, he was not the only one who was actually seeking to finance Chinese Christian images. The procurator Valentin Hamann sought to his francophone audience for actually more financial support for the production of images. Many of those became viral and were widespread everywhere in China. Among those, he actually mentions 3 types of images that were particularly important, and I quote,
The first type of image depicts the Lord of Heaven, as the Chinese say. 2,000 copies were printed and are already completely sold out. A new batch of 10,000 has been ordered. The second, with a print run of 10,000, depicts Saint Michael casting down the devil. 8,000 copies were ordered in less than a year. The third shows the guardian angel holding the hand of a Chinese boy, leading him from the shadows of death into the full, invigorating light of the gospel. 10,000 copies of this piece were ordered in less than a year.
Yes. So, actually, the original iconography of the last two images has been attributed to Giuseppe Castiglione Langenin, the famous Italian painter in Beijing. And although there is some controversy on the attribution of those paintings, the last whereabouts of these watercolor on paper paintings was actually in the city of Pordenone in Italy in 1994. You can see actually a very beautiful high quality images from the catalog of the exhibition. Okay. But Valentin Hamann wasn't only trying to convey a message of sharing those images. He wanted to promote the idea that those Chinese Christian images produced in France and then sent to China were extremely crucial in order to fight against what he calls idols, that is, all the non-Catholic images present in China at the time. And I quote,
Although it is not widely known in Europe, China as a whole is still enslaved to the devil, and the worship of idols assures hell the secure possession of nearly 400 million inhabitants. Who will remove the shameful objects of this abominable cult? Catholic images, distributed by the missionary, they will take the place usurped by the devil in the household of the Chinese.
However, in Shijiahui, there were Chinese Jesuit missionaries who actually had a very different approach towards non-Catholic communities present in Shanghai. One of them was Stephen or Stephanus Xu Mai. And in 1879, Stephen Xu published a very short booklet for newly arrived European scholastic brothers entitled the Parva Rerum Sinensium Adumbratio, which meant to convey or to actually provide an outlook of general ideas about Chinese religious practices as well as Chinese culture. And I quote,
The scholastic brothers, recently arrived in China, immediately burning with a desire to learn and read whatever pertains to the events occurring in this empire, are striving with much effort to seek out and investigate various works. Therefore, this small outline of Chinese things is now offered to alleviate that difficulty and is dedicated to their desire, being compiled and arranged from various valid authors and historical works.
Although Stephen Xu mentioned both Taoism and Buddhism as being superstitions, he actually conveyed also a much more nuanced approach towards those religious communities, quite in contrast to the much stronger words used by Haman before. And I quote,
Those who read this booklet are earnestly urged to pray to God for the salvation of this people rather than to be resentful towards them, so that I may dare to express sympathy for them.
And however, the cross-cultural encounter with Taoist deities was actually very much present in the concerns of Chinese Christian communities on a very practical level, not only on a theoretical level. One case study, which was actually presented by Luigi Sica in his cases of conscience from the community, the Chinese Christian community in Nanjing, offered us a very different idea of the encounter between Chinese Christian communities and Taoist deities. And I quote,
Nicodemus, a neophyte and stonemason, constructs houses and especially fireplaces for unbelievers. According to the Gentiles' customs, he is required to decorate certain niches in the walls for the placement of superstitious images, especially the idol that protects the fireplace, Zaojun. He does not make these niches himself, but so as not to leave the work incomplete and thus lose payment, he suggests that his pagan associate carry out this part of the work. Some Christians are scandalized by this situation, and therefore Nicodemus asks Marcellinus, the missionary, whether this is permissible for him.
And of course, at the very end, Marcellinus says that this is not a problem at all. He can actually build the niches, and everyone is happy about it, and there is no problem. I would like then to continue to the second part on the production of Christian artworks in Shijiahui and Tushanwan. And actually, I would like to start by mentioning precisely another account, again by Luigi Sica, that offers us what happened in 1852 when the image production and the production of Catholic statues started in the Shijiahui area, and I quote,
In this year, 1852, our brother Juan Ferrer, Fan Zongting, 1817 to 1856, a Spaniard by birth who had earned for himself quite a high reputation as a sculptor, a reputation well-deserved as evidenced by his works, with which he adorned the church of Xujiahui and Tongjiatong, took into his discipleship several boys from among the students of the Ignatian College in July, under the direction of the superior, to teach them the principles of sculpture and painting. From this arose the origin of the School of Painters of Xujiahui, which continues to this day, and which, under the guidance of teachers and the efforts of two of our Chinese brothers, Peter Lu and Simon Liu, has been of great benefit to us in the decoration of the churches and chapels of the mission.
Juan Ferrer was lucky. Was very lucky because his father, Joseph Ferrer, was a very renowned and famous painter in Spain already, and therefore he had the opportunity to be trained in Valencia by his father before reaching the Jesuit mission in Xujiahui. And I quote,
From his earliest youth, under the guidance of his father, who had acquired for himself the reputation of an outstanding sculptor in the royal palace of the Escorial, to which he was attached, he practiced the art of sculpture and statuary with great praise. Yet Juan Ferrer was far more useful through the example of his virtues, which shone forth in him, rather than through the mastery of his art. External guests, who frequently came to visit his school and to admire his sculptures, were astonished by the good brother's humility, modesty, and the sincerity and purity of his entire demeanor.
and you can see here actually the signature of Jose Ferrer, as well as an image of the sculpture workshop in Tushanwan, preserved in the Jesuit archives in Rome. Not all Jesuit missionaries were actually very good painters. Some tried, but they failed. And unfortunately, one of them was Italian. Sica wrote actually a very hagiographic account celebrating the five Massa brothers, all brothers by blood, who all joined the mission in Xujiahui, in Shanghai. And one of them, Nicola Massa, according to him, was much better of a nurse than a painter, although he actually tried. And I quote,
After Monsignor de Bessy departed, Brother Nicola was recalled to our small residence of Xujiahui near Shanghai, and there, in addition to the duties of his rank, he took up the task of painting on canvas with oil. Certainly, his paintings were not those of a master in the art, but in those early days, they were of great utility to our very poor chapels.
at least he's right. However, interestingly, we do also have accounts on the written by orphans in Tushanwan, or possibly on behalf of them in Chinese, sent to the Father General of the Society of Jesus in Rome. I translated partially these letters with my colleague Fan Zhenshu, and I would like to offer you here an excerpt in order to understand precisely how images, especially of Our Lady, were extremely important for the orphans who produce Chinese Christian images and Christian images in Tushanwan, in Xujiahui. And I quote,
Your Highness thus follows this example and gives us embracing mercy. Therefore, we humble pupils who are learning painting respectfully have drawn a painting of the Holy Mother having our Lord in her arms and presented here. All students, bowing low on the ground for this respect, humbly request Your Highness's insightful observance for your blessing. Students gathering from the Jiangnan area present carefully and holding it with reverence.
yes, and you can actually see here also two interesting photographs of the publishing house in Tushanwan, here and here. And here is an image of the Salus Poveri Romani, printed by Liu Desai, who was actually the one mentioned before, Father Liu. Okay, I would like then to conclude by stimulating you on the reception, the letter reception of these artworks in a different exhibition in 1934 in Naples, a very controversial one, as we will see. So, during the second international exhibition of colonial art in Naples, promoted by the fascist regime in Italy and having a very nationalistic and colonial-centered approach to non-European art, Jesuit missionaries decided to display some of the artworks which were actually produced in Tushanwan. Moreover, the infamous idols that were so much criticized before were taken by the Jesuit missionaries and brought to Naples precisely in this controversial context and displayed as a sort of trophy of the victory of Jesuit missionaries on this, on Taoism and Buddhism especially. And one of those is what they call the Chinese idols. So they presented here these 3 different works, 2 produced by orphans in Tushanwan, a wooden table carved in the Jesuit-led orphanage in what they call it Shijiahui, but it's Tushanwan, as you can see here from this image. Then a set of wooden lamps also produced in Tushanwan that you can see here. And finally, a Chinese idol, possibly a female Taoist deity, which actually was venerated for many generations, according to the Jesuit missionaries who brought this statuette by a family near Shanghai, who then converted to Christianity. Normally what happened to those statuettes is that where they were destroyed or they were burned or thrown into rivers. The Jesuit missionaries in this case decided to bring it to Naples and to display it. And I would like just to conclude to show you how they wanted to display their success in the mission in Tushanwan, as many of the Jesuit missionaries, as we've seen before, were coming from Naples. And you can see here the two lamps, and also here you can see more all the objects that were displayed, and as well as vase here. So I would like just to conclude by mentioning precisely the fact that it's very complex to deal with these artworks and how they traveled in so many different parts. Sometimes the story can start from one region and end up in a completely different context. And I look very much forward to listening to your comments and questions. And I thank you again for your patience with my voice. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonio, for that, for opening us up today. I will start with the first question in my role as moderator, and I want to start with where you ended in this exhibition in 1934 as part of this colonial exhibition in Naples. You mentioned that it was a controversial exhibition. I love myself a good museum controversy. Can you say a little bit more about what made it so controversial?
It was controversial because actually the Jesuit missionaries were part of a larger fascist-led exhibition that meant to celebrate actually the colonial engagement of Italy, especially in Africa. And China was presented in a similar colonial fashion as being part of this colonial victory. So if you might have seen before in the booklet, in the short catalog of the exhibition by the Jesuits, there is a sentence by the dictator Benito Mussolini that says that Italians needs to be everywhere. And somehow this a very hyperbolic colonial approach was adopted by Jesuit missionaries in 1934. So it's very interesting to see how the cross-cultural approach that we have seen before, highlighted especially by Luigi Sica and many other Italian missionaries, was then contrasted with how it was presented much later in a colonial setting in which the same artworks were presented but from a completely different perspective. So I found this very controversial and at the same time extremely fascinating, because an object starts its story, its journey in one place and ends up in a completely different one. And I think we've seen this already in a previous presentation. We'll see more later on today as well. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Let's open it up to the floor for questions. Helena.
So one question about this exhibition, obviously, because it's such a fascinating example. You're saying that they presented idols. Was there any distinction of what type of religion this would be from? Because what we see in a similar thing in Ljubljana is that there was some idea about what is Buddhism and what is Taoism. So was there any labeling there or not really?
No. And this is what makes it even more controversial, because the problem is precisely this, that Jesuit missionaries in Shanghai, especially those from Naples, they tried very hard to distinguish between various religious traditions, and they engaged with different religious communities in different ways. At the same time, in this colonial setting, at a certain point, everything becomes idols. There is no distinction between Taoism, Buddhism, or even Confucianism. When we look at what, for example, Stephen Xu does, but also Angelo Zottoli in his works, as well as Luigi Sica, they try to distinguish and they try to attempt to create a cross-cultural dialogue that, of course, is also conflictual. So it's very complex, but they try at least to show a distinction between the various communities and to actually inform also the religious brothers in Italy, for example, but also in Europe in general, about those distinctions, so that they deal with those communities in different ways. In this colonial setting, all this is gone. And so, yeah, I find this very distressing, given the efforts of the Jesuit missionaries in Naples, from Naples in Shanghai.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Antonio. Very fascinating. Is there any evidence of stylistic, iconographic details or artistic even details that when people buy this or Catholic churches buy these objects, they would request the objects to be produced in particular style, or are they just from the catalog?
Yeah, so sometimes there are some requests, and some of the objects became, as I mentioned, more viral or more popular than others. And it's very interesting because when I was in Vanves to do my research on the Jesuit archives in France, I noticed that actually the iconography of Saint Michael was particularly popular. We find it in the interiors of many churches. And there have been works and studies on this iconography because, of course, this is again the idea of a triumph over the devil, which was associated sometimes with non-Catholic images. So again, it's a very complex, let's say, network in which those images change their meaning and they're adopted by various communities in different ways. Sometimes the images will just be sent, and some other times there will be some, let's say, special requests. For example, Haman mentioned in his article not to send any statuettes to China because they would be too similar, especially Marian statuettes, because they would be too similar to Wang Yin. But in reality, Marian devotional images, especially statuettes, were widely spread everywhere in the Shanghai area and were particularly popular. So there is also a contrast between what many of the missionaries wanted to convey and what actually happened also in the mission, especially with different kind of media as well.
Yes, Thomas.
Thank you very much. I would just add a small things about this perception of idols, which is very different from, on the one hand, missionaries who are in China and who are mediators and who absolutely need to understand what are these religions or thought in order to deal with them or to fight against them. And on the other hand, their audience in Europe who have no understanding about these religions and they even don't know they exist. And the perception and the narrative of the missionaries is then a kind of we and us story. So very polarizing, and the us is just box, and you put everything in it. That is one point. And the other point is that you also have evolution between the 19th century, where you have still a very ultramontane and radical Catholicism in Europe, and then the changing that we will see today in several papers in the 1920s, and these first ethnographic exhibitions in 1922 in the Lateran, and a kind of interest for art, not for the content of the religion, but for the artistic quality of statues of Buddha or paintings from China and the world. So you have that evolution, but it's never about face, it's about form, it's about really the art aspect. But the content of the face, of course, is pagan. And then, of course, the last point I want to add, have a French Jesuit, I just forgot his name, who published a series of more than 10 books about superstitions in China. It's a very famous one, published in Tushanwan and illustrated with lithographs in colors. And he's seriating practices of daily life, including feng shui and these kind of superstitions. And then also different deities, but it's written in the style of around 1900, which is sometimes with very hard words.
Yes, I agree.
All right, I think on that note, by the way, that series that you're talking about, that is Henri Doré's series on Chinese superstition.
Yes.
You can get the entire digitized set on the internet, on internetarchive.com. And then in the interest of keeping us all on time, except volume 16, you'll have to look for that one yourself in your local library. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Dr. Antonio.
Thank you.
Our next speaker wrote his dissertation on the Tushanwan workshop. He is assistant professor of art history at Louisiana State University. So let us welcome to the stage Dr. William Ma.
I just have to say it's such an honor to be here, and I have to thank Kevin first for reminding me of this work that I've been putting off for a while since my dissertation times, and an opportunity to revisit it. And thank you to Director Owen for having me here as well, and of course the incredible hardworking staff in organizing and arranging everything. As I've been saying to everybody, this is one of the best organized conferences I've ever been to. So thank you all. I'm going to present, Antonio actually served a really lovely sort of foundation on some of the works I'll be talking about. I'm going to sort of really focus on a group of photographs that most of them are sort of undated, although there are clues to when perhaps they were dated. So I'll start. A group of 7 Chinese children, ages about 8 to 10, stand in front of a shrine of Virgin Mary and Child. 2 of the children are holding a banner with the text in Gothic script, Merci à nos bénéfacteurs, thanks to our benefactors. Most of the children are wearing the same costume in an ill-fitted doublet and a pair of puffy breeches, topped with a dashing beret and feather cutout made out of paper. The child in the middle, slightly bigger than the rest, seems to have taken off his helmet, stares intently into the camera. With numerous crosses, the coat of arms, and the sword by his side, he is playing the part of the little crusader. Taken in the courtyard of the art and craft workshops of Tushanwan Wei in Shanghainese, a French Jesuit orphanage at the Catholic community of Xujiahui, Zikawe in Shanghainese, here is a better look at the courtyard from a different angle from behind the shrine. On both sides of the courtyard, you can see the different workshops so here and here, which include oil paintings, stained glass making, wood carving, metal casting, and printing. And the number of workshops increase and decrease depending on time period as well. Each workshop was headed by a Jesuit brother, designed to equip Chinese Catholic orphans with a new Western and modern vocational skill that would enable their later success in life in the semi-colonial urban center of Shanghai. As explored elsewhere by a new crop of scholarship, including mine, Tushanwan workshop had played a foundational role in modern sinology, print culture, and modern art in China between the late Qing and the early 20th century. But few have fully examined the function and agency of photography from Tushanwan as an important source of documentation and its own legitimate form of expression. In this paper, I will begin this process by taking on an expansive but leisurely look at the role of photography at Tushanwan as a direct product of the community and environment that produced it. Founded in the 1860s, the Tushanwan orphanage workshops were part of the larger Catholic community of Xujiahui in Shanghai. The entire operation, though under the auspice of the French protectorate, operated independently from the colonial government adjacent to the community in the international concessions. As suggested by images like this one taken taken of the orphans at Tushanwan, much of the operation operated on the generous donations of lay people and Catholic charitable organizations overseas, such as the Association of the Holy Childhood. Reproduced in Catholic publications around the world, the banner gives thanks. In this image, reproduced in Catholic publications around the world, this banner gives thanks to distant benefactors and bonds them to a common Catholic community. The two kneeling Chinese figures, here. One man and one boy are racially marked by the unmistakable cues. But the boys in front were no longer burdened by the sign of racial backwardness, which helped us date the picture to perhaps after 1911, when there was no imperial power to impose this particular hairstyle. These boys were the future, educated here within the confines of Xujiahui and Tushanwan under an updated and European curriculum. With newly acquired vocational skills, they were spiritually reformed, becoming modern and French through the European colonial eye. The costumes point to the daily life of the Chinese orphans beyond the classroom or the workshop. Their lives at Tushanwan were enriched and punctuated by stage plays, festive occasions, noisy festivals, noisy occasion that would include performing marching band, which is led by Aloysius Beck, and sporting events. The history of Jesuit missionaries in China can be roughly divided into two periods. The first began in the late 16th century, was led by a learned man like Matteo Ricci. Hopefully, many you have seen these four paintings upstairs. He is the figure on the very left of these four portraits painted by the orphans for the 1915 Pan-Pacific International Exposition in San Francisco. So their facility with Chinese language, specifically the language of the learned literary Chinese, these early Jesuits were accepted by the intellectual elites. Armed with their knowledge of science and later technological advances from Europe, they were welcomed into the imperial courts of the Ming and then the succeeding Qing. Yet, even as their reputation and prestige rose within the walls of the Forbidden City, they were seen and treated as no more than foreign technicians. You can see that in these portraits. Each early Jesuit surrounded by their emblematic tools and instruments. The clavichord, for example, which is actually a step organ by the 19th century, that's what they would be common. The world map and different astronomical instruments. The true goal of proselytization was often cut short by the restriction and outright prohibition of their movement and activity within China by the same emperors who employed the expertise. The total number of Jesuits and the neophyte they were able to convert were far and few in between. The second wave of Jesuit came, quite literally, riding with one of the gunboats that forcibly opened Qing China to the rest of the world. In the Treaty of Wangpa, signed between Qing China and France at the conclusion of the First Opium War in 1844, one of the stipulations was the practice of Christianity in China should then be made legal. As a result, scores of Christian missionaries, including the Jesuits, rushed in, penetrating ever deeper into the interior of China. This time, the missionaries focus on the common folks instead of the elites, yielding a much higher success rate, comparatively speaking, of course, than the first period. Of course, I would also add that their success was assisted by the ever-growing presence of European military power and the coerced collaboration of the local Chinese government, which ultimately led to violent clashes between native Chinese, Chinese Christians, and Western missionaries during the late 19th century, most famous of which was, of course, the Boxer Rebellion from 1899 to 1901. One of the most important converts from the first wave was the Ming statesman Xu Guangqi. Oops, I keep doing that. It was at his ancestral home on the outskirts of Shanghai that Xu Jiahui, literally translated as the river confluence, and at the home of the Xu clan, that a Catholic community was created and expanded. In addition to the orphanage and the orphanage workshops, Xu Jiahui included hospitals, schools, libraries, museums, and an observatory. It was a center of intellectual activities and a frequent stop for foreign visitors to China. The orphanage workshops play an important role in contributing to the academic community, since the printing workshop was a well-known and prolific publishing and printing many of the latest scientific or sinological studies. All the workshops should be considered together as an organic whole rather than its individual parts. They work together and share many of the resources and personnels. In many ways, photography was founded to supplement the printing workshop and to provide services to other organizations at Xu Jiahui. Take, for example, one of the first museums in China, Xu Jiahui Natural History Museum, which housed one of the finest collection of zoological and botanical specimens in the world at the time, thanks to the extensive networks created by Catholic missionaries and scholars now situated throughout the colonial East Asia, and other foreign scientific organizations outside of Xu Jiahui, such as the Royal Asiatic Society. Photography was an important component of their process of curating, documenting, organizing, and classifying the collection, which were then reproduced, printed, and excerpted as illustrations at the printing workshop using one of the latest photo printing technologies, such as photo engraving or colotypes on glass. Basic skills in printing and drawings were essential to learning about photography. The sculptor and later inspiration for Tantan's Blue Lotus, Chang Zhongren, recalled that after entering the workshop, he had to first learn how to trace and copy both in pencil and in oil. He was finally allowed to learn about photography by first learning to mix the chemicals, and then by working at the museum with photographs of the birds to highlight their phenotypic traits through subtle manipulations of the negatives, such as removing the background, highlighting the contours, and adjusting the details of feathers. Here, you get a real sense of the close connections between the various workshops and the larger community at Xu Jiahui. Many of the vocational skills were related and can be tracked across different workshops, from wood carving to painting to printmaking to photography. Officially founded in 1902, although Aloysius Beck was actually in charge of photographing and documenting the orphanage before him. The photography workshop was headed by a half-Chinese Jesuit whose Irish father left him in the care of Tushanwan when he was a child, Henry Yu. He entered the orphanage and was trained by the European Jesuit brothers there. Most photography we see in this presentation were probably taken, if not then supervised under his direction, though to find the exact attribution may be difficult. In 1914, there were 3 workers and 5 students at the workshop. Thus far, I have not been able to recover their names. In my works on Tushanwan, most orphan art workers were unnamed. How much agency did these students have in creating the final product? How conscious were they behind the camera in the construction of the identity of their fellow orphans, classmates, and friends? In this printed photograph from a catalog, we know the students were conscious of their intervention. A mirror is placed on the back of an intricately carved frame for a chimney destined for Leopold II, King Leopold II of Belgium, to furnish his Chinese restaurant at his royal park at Laeken. In it, 4 art workers are reflected, flanking the black hooded tripod in the center. In this proto-selfie, the orphans consciously position themselves not only within the frame of the finely carved work of their fellow classmates, they had also included the Virgin Mary in a grotto, probably the popular Our Lady of Lourdes behind them. Such compositions mimic the membership cards from the Association of Holy Childhood, seen on the right, which were widely circulated throughout the Catholic countries. In the case of the photography, the priests and the nuns, handmaidens of God's work, are now replaced with the black veil tripod, the new instrument of salvation. Founded in 1843 by Bishop Charles de Janssen, his explicit purpose was to save the unbaptized souls of Chinese children. As several scholars have pointed out, the association targeted French children and their mostly middle to lower class families, connecting them financially and imaginatively to their pagan counterparts in China in the trafficking of what I call a global economy of sympathy. Photography, especially those of children, was an essential tool in this marketplace, as mimetic quality of photograph relocates a viewer across geographies, bringing them face to face with these poor orphans in a hyper-realistic encountering of the other. Now, combined with the technology to reproduce them in printed materials, photography enabled a wide distribution and circulation of a particular image of the Chinese orphans and Chinese bodies. The printed materials included reports, monthly journals, and even newspaper articles, reaching audience both Catholic and non-Catholic in China and outside of China. In previous depictions of Chinese orphans, such as these 2 images from the Association of Holy Childhood, the bodies of Chinese orphans were seen helpless and indistinguishable, like naked babies, consciously evoking images of saved souls in European depictions of Judgment Day. They were being rescued from drowning, a reference to the supposed prevalent practice of infanticide in China. Chinese orphans under the care of Catholic missionaries in these photographs, by contrast, were strong, confident, well-clothed, and well-fed. Here, many of the art workers are really, in fact, young adults. If we remember, many of the art workers, they often stay on after they finish their training at the workshops. Their short crop hair proudly announced their modernity by getting rid of their queues, the external and racial signs of a backward past. We, like so many visitors to the workshops, through the help of the camera lens, seem to have entered the workshop unexpectedly. The Jesuit brother in charge, presumably the head of the woodcarving workshop, Aloysius Beck, is not even in the room. He is in another room in the back holding up a cross. That somehow also happened to be the focal point of the picture. Some of the art workers continue working, but a few look up very naturally to engage directly with the camera and the people behind it. This confident return of the gaze to the mechanical intruder is, I would argue, fairly unique to Tushanwan. This point becomes clear when one compares it to a contemporary photograph of an orphan workshop from another Catholic missions in China. In this photograph from the Xavier Mission Guild, an Irish Jesuit organization in China, the missionary supervision took on a much larger presence, while the working orphans were instructed to be hard at work and not engage with the camera, creating a almost perfect self-contained tableau vivant. But of course, working with boys, there will always be a little mischievous one who try to steal a quick peek at the camera, knowing that he's not supposed to. In her analysis of Michelangelo Antonini's 1972 documentary 中国 or China, Ray Charles explained to his Chinese subjects' uncomfortable reaction to the camera. Quote, "The Chinese reaction indicate that photography is about social space. In particular, how social space is or should be negotiated in relationship to one's surrounding and fellow human being, including in particular the photographer who is armed," end quote. Both the Tushanwan photographers and the Chinese orphans belong to the same social space, and the relationship to each other and to the Jesuit brothers was one of familiar and familial. After all, they were surrounded by fathers, brothers, sisters, and the Holy Mother. But let's again return to this intriguing, this intriguing photograph. The orphans knew that the mechanics of the camera and what it would do. As the shutter closes, the light hits the mirror and it bounces back to the camera, traveling and reflecting through several more lenses before being captured on the negative through the activation of series of chemical reactions. As the light bounces back and forth, seeing the subject become the object that is to be seen in an endless self-containing loops, fully contained within the ornately carved frame with traditional Jiangnan motif that derive from the research of missionaries, thus associating them with a specific place and confining them to a particular race. From the literal wooden frame to the photographic edges, in other sales catalog photographs, these young Chinese artworkers are contained, though often barely, to the edges. Often with the parts of the body cut off and pushed to the sides, they serve as framing device for the large and intricate carvings in the center. Though the wood carvings are clearly the subjects, so too are the orphan artworkers. Note not all catalog photographs include young artworkers. Most contain only simply the product with different options in terms of size, color, or style. With larger pieces such as a full altar or the dragon roundel intended for the facade of the China Pavilion for King Leopold II, they announce the achievement of these little art workers, including presumably these are the people who make them, making them seem so much more remarkable and impressive. But the boys serve more than the practical function of providing a sense of scale. Even though the orphans were not available for purchase, their salvation could be obtained for the right price, enticing potential customers and donors overseas to contribute to the economy of sympathy in the name of Christian charity. Like the meticulously carved works in the center, the orphan art workers, too, were products produced by Tushanwan Orphanage, just as wood carvings were transformed by shaping pieces of raw timber. These newly crafted body rose from the unruly environment that abandoned them in the chaos of late 19th, early 20th century China. They are then represented as strong, healthy, and implicitly Christian Chinese, with their tiny, productive hands capable of making beautiful things. The hand of the orphans were behind everything, and this is something visually, literally sort of manifested visually. Here's a page from the catalog that accompanied the more than 80 pagoda models at the 1915 Pan-Pacific Exposition in San Francisco that you are all here to see. line up in a row on a shadow ledge set against a haphazardly stretched canvas backdrop, they do echo other Tushanwan products and how they're presented in sales catalogs. While the orphans were not pictured, they were actually there. In a classic moment of punctum, as discussed by Roland Barthes, we see the hands of sometimes the arms of an orphan grasping the canvas board behind the pagodas. Literally behind each pagoda stands the orphan who made them. The hand, once exposed, cannot be unexposed. They can become a different focus in these photographs. There are two ways to read these hands. One way is to situate these hands through the colonial context, where the colonized and racialized bodies are either reduced to anonymous data or as fragments and invisible. In the latter, the critical labor is obscure, exploited, and unacknowledged, all in the service of scientific objectivity. As these pagoda models should be considered as some of the first scientific architectural models in China, as I argue in my catalog essay, these hands were part of the supposed supporting structure, neutral and unnoticeable, like the white canvas board that they're holding. Another interpretation is through the aesthetics of the handmade, which had its origin in the arts and craft movement in Europe. The association between manual laborers and moral rectitude was championed by many social reformers from England to the United States. When these ideas were brought to China by Jesuit missionaries, they were read through the lens of medievalism. The anti-industrialization focus on the artisanal quality of the handmade and the nostalgic recreation of the communal ideals, where anonymous, skilled craftsmen and art workers labor harmoniously and selflessly together for the greater glory of God. Thus, we see in photo after photo the work of the hand of the art workers. We read in archival records, both official and unofficial from Jesuit and visitors alike, frequent references to medieval workshops or compares their work to medieval artistic practice, like in the illuminated manuscripts. From paintings to wood carvings, from shoemaking to metal castings, the variety of manual craft transformed these little Chinese bodies, both physically and spiritually. To conclude, ever since the introduction of photography into China in the mid-19th century, it has had a profound impact on many aspects of visual culture in China. It was brought along by European missionaries and imperialists, and in that sense, photography at Tushanwan continued to closely serve the colonial project of knowledge production about the Oriental other, through the imposition of a scientific system of framework onto religion, people, flora, fauna, architecture, and art. Yet, when the camera lens was turned to the self, from the orphan behind the camera to the orphans in front, the complicated circuits of gazes and visual acknowledgement was completed. The other became the self, and in this enclosed social space, open to view by a global Catholic community, the orphans regain their own sense of individuality. For example, they have the choice to look up or keep working with their heads down, and room to exercise their artistic expression, quality not often valued in the other types of work that they produce at the workshop. By returning to the gaze in these photographs, the orphan art workers project themselves and plug into the larger world beyond Xujiahui. Thank you.
Thank you, William, for sharing your work on the photography at Tushanwan. You've really shown us how photography can operate in multiple modes, as in some ways straightforward documentary, as ways to advertise for Tushanwan, both their work of spiritual salvation, but also vocational salvation, as well as photography serving as sales catalog images. I want to open just with a basic question, because you've spoken so much about the role of the Tushanwan workshops and how photography partners with that to give these orphans training in multiple forms. So I'm just curious, what happens after they grow up?
Hello? Okay. So at least the fate of the students who are trained in photographic studio is somewhat unknown. Like so many of the orphans, they remain anonymous. So there isn't a sort of direct sort of sense, although they have been there have been studies that trace some of the people who graduated from the printing workshop and painting workshop to go on and have a career themselves. So if we speak outside of the photographic studio, they are sort of specific artists who started their own printmaking workshop, starting to sort of printing publishing house and things like that, yeah.
Okay, questions? Yes.
Thank you. We were wondering if you knew, or if anyone knows, if the students were chosen, the different workshops, if they had some kind of testing or something, like a entrance exam, to know where their skills would...
Yeah. I don't know of a formal exam, but from the records I've read, it seems to, because they basically had to stay in this sort of Yuyingtang sort of places before they were 7 or 8, right? So they would be observed to see if they excel at drawing, for example, or carving, and then they would be placed in one of these places. Or if they're not excelling in any, perhaps, finding the right sort of workshop so they would learn a sort of skill, yeah.
Dr. Wang Lianming, I saw you had a hand up.
Thank you, William, for this very enlightening lecture. I would like to know, because we all know that Alphonse Favier, he maintained contact with, what's her name, Holy Childhood in Paris, and solicited a lot of money from European countries. He also went on like a propaganda trip to seek for support, right? I'm wondering, except for the argument they made that all the photographs were meant to be produce knowledge of the Oriental other, I wonder whether some of the materials have been sent back to Holy Childhood or for making any of this advertisement for their achievement in China, except for the knowledge production part. Thank you.
So I must confess, I have not been to the Holy Childhood archives, but in sort of little hints of it, sort of things, a publication that do mention Holy Childhood in some of the archive I visit in California, in Banff, they do sort of seem to have some of the images as a way to sort of respond to them, yeah. And many of the images I show, these are not unique images. So for example, the workshop that Antonio also used, it was found in Rome, it was in Banff, it was in California. I'm sure there are plenty other ones that I'm not aware of. So they are reproduced everywhere, yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right,
Yeah, and I see there's a hand in the back.
Were the children also reading, etc.?
Basic ones, certainly nothing sort of too sophisticated. At least, at the very least, they were receiving language education. So many of the children were learning Latin, French, and English. And some of them did receive an education in math, but also that would also depend on the availability as well. I mean, I think I mentioned here too that attached to, in Shijiahui, there is other sort of institute of higher education, so sort of colleges and things like that. So they would have opportunities to sort of learn things other than sort of vocational skills.
All right, well, let's continue this discussion outside during our snack break. Thank you, William.
Thank you very much, Dr. William Ma, Dr. Patricia Yu as well. Thank you, Dr. William Ma, for sharing on the Tushanwan workshop. So welcome back. So this is the second part of the third panel of our international conference. So once again, pleased to welcome our moderator to join us back on stage, Dr. Patricia Yu, everyone.
Well, I actually think our next speaker doesn't really need an introduction, but we are going to hear from the senior curator of Chinese art at this museum to talk about the the pagoda models that we have upstairs and their historical significance. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce to you all to Dr. Kevin Lam.
So good morning, everyone, and thanks for coming. And I cannot thank enough the Asian Civilisations Museum, and to share a little bit about this. This is my first exhibition in Singapore, so it has special significance for me. And oh, thank you. Oh, but they're counting. Okay, so they are counting already. Okay, so I always overrun. But before proceeding, I want to share with you something about my experience as the curator of the show. And also tell you, that's like something related to rationale why I talk about this today. So as the curator, I conducted many tours, and I've encountered many, many lovely visitors. And thanks to the wonderful exhibition design team, we have a wonderful exhibition. And thanks for the beautiful video, and thanks for the wonderful loans from the Vatican. I can see many of the visitors are really engaged at the end of the tour. And in several instances, some of these lovely visitors, after the tour, they approach me and look into my eyes, with a fire, with love. And you can see at that point, they were so engaged, they were so identified with the collection. They love it with the heart. They love the Tushanwan orphanage. All the wonderful works that the Jesuits has done. And they look into me with a very simple question. So, Kevin, these pagodas are authentic, right? They are very accurate, right? And many, many times I just want to go with a straight yes. But after I've done all the research, and with the little remaining conscience in me, I try to come up with a very diplomatic answer. So on one hand, they are accurate in 20th century standard, early 20th century standard. But at the same time, there are a lot of creativity, departures, but they are reasonable. But every time I know after that answer, I can see the disappointment in these lovely people, and I know that I've broken more hearts. Today, my talk, I will focus on these inaccuracies. I would say it's like a justification. I want to tell you the simple message is, it is because these inaccuracies that this collection is so important. So here I start. Okay, we go 2.5 minutes already. The 84 pagoda models made at the Tushanwan workshop under the supervision of Brother Aloysius Beck represent a significant undertaking to document Chinese architecture at a time when systematic architectural studies in China were still in their very infancy. This was also the first time that the diversity of Chinese pagoda architecture, spanning different historical periods, regional styles, materials, and types, was introduced to a Western audience on such a scale. And beyond this historical significance, the models can also serve as a valuable architectural archive, preserving details of important structures as they were in the early 20th century, many of them which are no longer visible today. For example, the model of Longhuata, the Dragonflower Pagoda in Shanghai, that we have in the first section, at the very center of our first section of the exhibition, which the original was located near the Tushanwan orphanage, faithfully preserves architectural features that have been lost to later restoration. For your information, there was a major restoration for the Longhuata in 1950, which completely changed the look of this building. So in the Longhuata model that we have, the early 20th century feature, for example, the roofed bottom, the base, which was now, the walls were torn down completely. And so that's like the pictures that you will see nowadays when you actually go to this region. The model preserved this. And also, when you compare our model with photographs taken in the early 20th century, you can see another very wonderful feature is that the patterns of the balustrades on each floor is perfectly retained and captured in the model. So you can see, you can match the pattern of the balustrade on each floor. Again, each floor is accurately captured. And in addition to these architectural details, the model also captures traces of the building's layered history. At the base of the Longhuata model, there includes a plaque that is not documented in photographs or any textual records. But I believe it was highly likely there when the model was made, which was to commemorate an early 20th century restoration. So go and take a look at the model there. At the base, there's a little plaque there that says 光水甲午 设立宝塔朱禅书. And this is something that you can't see anywhere in photographs or in textual records. What we know is that this Zhu Chan played a very important role in the restoration of this pagoda in the early 20th century. It was said that he was a great calligrapher and painter. He sold his paintings and calligraphy to support the restoration. And I believe that this plaque was put up, in fact, he wrote himself after this restoration was done. But while some models display a high degree of fidelity to the original, others diverge in notable ways. Given the limited architectural documentation available at that time, the Tushanwan artisans often had to rely on the knowledge or photographs or partial visual references to reconstruct missing details. But accuracy itself is not always straightforward. At times, the artisan seems to have actively interpreted or translated the information they had at hand. A telling example is the model of the northern pagoda in Suzhou, the Beishita, which the workshop clearly regard as a landmark. In the 1915 exhibition little brochure that William also showed at the end of his presentation, it was described as one of the highest and most beautiful of China, in particular, including special crown basement. With the models, while the model that we have, while the model retained the basic form, we can also see there are changes made to it, and most notably, a group of sculpted figures added onto the entrance at the model. The front, you can see the front of this little group unmistakably is pointing to the journey to the west. That's the Zhu Bajie, right? That's Shao Wuzheng, and escorting the monk, Tang Shanjiang. Just, I don't know why the Monkey King is not there. But he will return, but I can assure you he will return later, more and more in our discussion. And at the end, there was a Mandarin-looking male with his attendant. At first glance, these figures might seem to be creative inventions, but historical sources suggest otherwise. A 1934 article on Suzhou landmarks records that the north entrance of the actual pagoda once featured sculptures of the journey to the west crossing a river on a turtle, while the south entrance, which is the back, depicted the 8 immortals crossing the sea. This is the record. You can see I translated here. So it is in fact not a very important article. It was just like some kind of like a general record or something in 1934. But you can see it was recorded there was something there once upon a time. And the Tushanwan workshop somehow reconstructed, rearranged the information and translated it into here. So that's a historical photograph on that side. You can still vaguely see there are very small figures there, although I couldn't actually make what they are from this photograph. But to complicate things, in several other cases, the differences between model and the original are much more imaginative and sometimes appear whimsical. And in the following part of my presentation, I will focus on these inaccuracies in 5 pagoda models, which include 4 that were painted to different extents with figures that were non-existent in the original. And I will argue that these inaccuracies or creative liberty or departures were on the one hand, pragmatic responses to limitations, but they also reflect more complex attitudes of the Tushanwan artisans about Chinese religious traditions, sometimes marked by intentional distancing, but at other times by symbolic integration. So I will begin with a model of Tianling Shita in Beijing. This is the city's oldest surviving pagoda, famous for its brick reliefs. Especially, I want to draw attention to, on one side, that's the relief of Manchu Sri on his lion. And this particular depiction was highly celebrated because you can see it vaguely, the attendant was actually pulling Manchu Sri lion. That annoys the animal, irritates the animal, and then the animal is turning its head around. Yeah. So this side of this pagoda was heavily photographed. And you can find a lot of photographs by different photographers from different countries. They photographed this. And the Tushanwan workshop, the artisans, captured this quite accurately, as you see on the left. But on the other side, is it? Okay, sorry. But on the other side, which was less commonly photographed, present a different case. As far as I can tell, the only sinologist who photographed and studied them was Ernest Boschmann, who played a very important role in the study of Chinese architecture. This is Boschmann, and this is his book published in 1930 called Pagoda, which was the first systematic study of Chinese pagodas in human history. So Boschmann, he photographed the other side when Pu Xian was on an elephant. And he also made wonderful studies. But the thing is, Boschmann, although later in his book Pagoda, he used a lot of the Tushanwan models as illustrations. At that point, he probably didn't know about this. He didn't know that the Tushanwan workshop were making pagodas. Oh, gosh. Oh, I didn't really show it here. Gosh. Okay. So what I want to show you is the Tushanwan artisans, they probably didn't have enough photographic sources. So what should be the elephant, the Pu Xian, on the other side? They devised some kind of, you don't know what kind of scene, which appears to me kind of like a theatrical scene on the other side. This improvisation, I think, is worth our attention because the workshop at that time not only had access to a much wider Jesuit missionary network, but at that time, the workshop also had one of the most comprehensive research and visual resources on Chinese religions at that time. For your information, when the Tushanwan workshop was making these pagodas, this publication by this Jesuit Onhi Dohe was being published. The researches into Chinese superstition was underway, being published by the Tushanwan workshop. Henri Doré, he was born in Western France and encouraged by his friend, who was the headmaster of the College of St. Ignatius in Shanghai, to begin his research on Chinese religion and superstitions. He was a lifelong collector of traditional folk art, many of which were absorbed in the profusely illustrated research into Chinese superstition. And the second part of the series, that is called On the Chinese Pantheon, began to appear from 1914 as the book models, I believe, were being made. And volumes 6 to volume 8 contained rich materials on Chinese deities, bodhisattvas, and other religious imagery. And the relationship between Doré and his helpers and the Tushanwan pagoda-making team must have been close. I will show you a lot of examples that how images were taken from Doré's research into Chinese superstition. But here I want to draw attention, on the other hand, numerous pagoda photos that featured in the research was featured in Henri Doré's books as decorative elements. So this is volume 1 from pages from the first volume of Onhidore's researches into Chinese superstitions. And you can see these pagoda photos were used up somehow randomly, unrelated to the content, as decorative pieces. So you mean if every chapter on the other side you have a pagoda photo, but that's nothing to do with the content of the chapter itself. And you may say, okay, this is, I mean, some of these pagoda photos are quite well known, are generic, but unmistakably there is one photo used in Onhidore that must have been the source of one of the Tushanwan pagodas. So you see the photo on the right, that was used also as a decoration in Onhidore, and it was used many times. There was one particular volume that he used it 3 times as a decoration. And this photo, you see there's like a little pagoda with a guy sitting there reading a book. And this is unmistakably the source of one of these pagodas that we are on view now up in our gallery. And this, I can tell you, this is a pagoda that I cannot identify. It is not a well-known pagoda. And you can see at the bottom of the pagoda, there's the little figure there reading a book, exactly copying from this. So, I mean, what I want to show is that not only the pagoda making team, as I'll show more, is looking into Onhidore's publication, but Onhidore himself, or his helpers, is also looking at the same group of materials that the pagoda project making team, the pagoda making people are using. They share the same visual resources. And so the question is, if the Tushanwan artisans, have such a wealth of resource, why they have to come up with this completely incongruent, asymmetric, representations, for example, like what we see in the Tianling Sita. And this deliberate mixing of religious and secular is also evident in the model of 大报恩系琉璃塔. So because of the time, I think I have to go a bit faster. I just want to tell you, I mean, the 大报恩系琉璃塔 model is unique among the 84 because it's the only one that the original was destroyed when the Tushanwan workshop was making the pagodas. So we believe that the model was based on a print after the last restoration. So we can see these are some of the panels' religious iconographies in the 大报恩系琉璃塔 model that upstairs. I want to draw attention to this. This is clearly borrowing from Onhidore's, this is the frontispiece of Volume 1. So not only the Bodhisattva-like figure is similar, but you can see the maid at the right is transposed to the other side. It's holding the vase. And some of these decorative motifs are also there. And then this is like also another illustrations included in Onhidore's book. So you can see, I mean, this is basically the same arrangement. But with all these possible wealth that religious iconography that they can use, the Tushanwan artisans added on all sides a panel of Chinese ink painting. That's what you see down at the bottom. Why they have to do this? What I want to propose is this is a way to dilute this overt Buddhist iconography in this model. Although we know that the Jesuits, they have been always in engagement with local religions, local traditions, and they are encouraged to study them. But to actually make Buddhist imagery or iconography or Buddhist objects is another completely different matter. What I want to say is this is another case that when this Buddhist iconography or Buddhist imagery is also being diluted in the making. So this is Jingzhou Ta, which is one of the most whimsical model in the whole set because you can see the original, it's basically white without any decoration, but the model is fully painted. It's the same. You can see on the entrances, each side, they are flanked by guardian gods, heavenly kings, that are quite conforming to the traditional conventions. But at the same time, they were juxtaposed with scenes that are properly secular. For example, this is Wang Xiji listening to the goose. The saint of calligraphy, Wang Xiji is said to have a special pendant, special liking of the sound of the goose. On that side, this is probably, you can call him the god of longevity, but it is not 100%, that's any kind of like old man. I mean, kind of, okay. And then that's another quite mysterious figure that I couldn't identify at the beginning, but after looking into Onhidore's researches into Chinese superstitions, I believe that this is Du Kang, the inventor of wine. And then there's another scene that I cannot identify. But what I want to say is these more or less like more secular images, non-religious heavy images were interspersed, juxtaposed with more serious religious iconography. And then also with all these more decorative elements added to it. So in general, I mean, these Buddhist pagodas, they were contextualized not just in a strictly religious context, but more in a cultural context in a sense. So time is really running short. I need to, but I still need to talk about, sorry. So if in the Daba Anxi Liu Ta or the Jingzhou Ta that we saw, you can say that the Tushanwan artisans, they are trying to distance themselves or try to dilute this Chinese iconography. In the next two examples, Kaiyuan Shita and the Liu He Ta, what I want to argue is that there's a more active engagement with Chinese religious imagery, which is within the context of Christianity. So to get short, Kaiyuan Shita is one of the most, I would say, accurate examples in this collection of pagodas. Ernest Borschmann, when he was writing his 1930 book, he especially singled out this model and saying that this model gives him a better impression about the proportion than the photographs taken by Oswald Siren. And so you can find this, the proportion is definitely wonderful, but at the base is where the creativity comes in. On the 5 sides, there include 5 panels of Journey to the West. Okay, I just skip. Okay, so as William pointed out, there's definitely a relationship between the Monkey King depicted on the Tushanwan models and in Onhidore's book. But my question is, why Journey to the West? Because Journey to the West in Onhidore's book doesn't really play a very important role. What I want to say, I believe that the Journey to the West has a special position within the sinologists and missionaries at that time. One special figure is Timothy Richard, who basically translated 西游记, the Journey to the West, into a mission to heaven, a great Chinese epic and allegory, and try to read into this Chinese classics Christian concepts. So rather than Journey to the West to get the scriptures, it was read as a spiritual pilgrimage. And this also fits into Timothy Richard's idea that Mahayana Buddhism is some kind of Asiatic Christianity that somehow exists somewhere once upon a time. But after years of development, they somehow go into the other, go astray. And this idea was not only proposed by Timothy Richard. Another guy, Herbert Erlen Giles, in his 1901 Introduction to Chinese Literature, he singled out a particular passage in the Journey to the West and said, this scene which follows almost recalls the Pilgrim's Progress. And so this scene is, to summarize, this scene is about the crossing of the sea after the group, Tang Shanjiang, the group reached the Buddha. So I believe that to apply this Journey to the West story onto Kaiyuan Shita is in fact was putting some acceptable story from a Christian context onto as decoration for this Buddhist pagoda. And to conclude, in the Pagoda of the 6 Harmonies, while structurally, architecturally speaking, the model is perfect. The Tushanwan artisans added a series of murals at the bottom, which is nowhere photographed or documented. And what I want to tell you is, in this representation, these different monks, they were arranged in a way that reminds people in Henri Doré's some of the illustrations of important monks. So, I mean, in Henri Doré's books, there are a number of these illustrations in volume 7 and 8 that you find when he is talking about a saint or important Buddhist worthy. He always put them in pairs, and one approaching the other. And that is what being done in the murals in Liuheta. And to tie everything up, in one of the scenes, you can see there's a little figure kneeling, seeking for truth at someone with a halo. And this, as we looked before, this is it's how the Tushanwan workshop depicts the Monkey King. So what I want to say is this, the Liuheta mural is an active engagement with Chinese religious iconography, but taking them in a different way and to put them in a narrative of truth-seeking, moral uplifting that was at that time acceptable and being promoted by people like Timothy Richard and Gilles. So, sorry, time's running short. To conclude, so I want to tell you the 84 pagoda models made at the Tushanwan workshop, they are not just tiny buildings, but they are full of big ideas. Some aim for architectural accuracies, others taking creative detours, and a few go completely off the map. But I think this particular quality that really reminds us why Tushanwan was called the cradle of modern Chinese art, because they not only emphasize technique, but imagination and find new ways to create new meanings. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kevin, for sharing your work on these pagoda models. It is so fascinating how these models seem to make claims to authenticity without themselves being fully authentic. I'm fascinated by the idea of the model as something that can depict something that was, a place that is, but also possibly be aspirational about being a model for the future as well. You've mentioned how these pagodas, they are in fact acts of creative translation, really, of translating an architectural site into a wooden carving that also is showcasing painting traditions that are being taught at the Tushanwan workshops. I want to talk about the actual exhibition. You have done so much research on this project, and I think for those of us who are going to go into the galleries after lunch, what do you want us to notice about the curatorial choices that have been made in exhibiting these 84 pagodas? You have 3 minutes.
Well, the curator. I mean, so to put it briefly, I hope that you understand that. I mean, one of the reasons we try to break it into different parts, based not just like not just because of practical limitations, but we actually want to curate a story. Of Tushanwan, of this orphanage with the pagodas. So I hope, our visitors can pay a little bit more attention and think why we are putting different pagodas at different places, why we dividing them into different sections. So I will hope I hope our visitors would contemplate or ponder on this and let me know what you think.
That's such a great professorial answer of like, why don't you figure out what the curator is thinking? Let's open it up to the floor. Oh, William. Oh,
Okay, I'll go. Thank you so much. I was always so happy to see you make that actual concrete sort of connections. But certainly the Doré drawings were also used beyond the pagodas. they were used in other cabinets as well. So I wonder if you can sort of speak, I think what you sort of tease out, this sort of connection between different sort of the way to sort of tone down the Buddhist message, I think is right. But I would like you to speak a little bit more about the use of other types of motifs, specifically drawing from operas, from historical dramas, such as the cabinet above, right? You see them in other types of furnitures, other types of production in Tushanwan as well. Some of it drawn from Doré, some of them not. Some of them from Beck's own collection. So is it possible to have these type of reading in these other sort of areas as well, with depictions of the Eight Immortals, depictions of Zhuge Liang, depictions of, you know?
I think for the context of these, I mean, because somehow they're still they're all understood to be Buddhist pagodas. So I would say, I mean, from what I find out, it seems, and as what you suggested me to look at this point, I still think Onhidori seems to be playing the most important role in this. And so I mean, in my reading is that if it doesn't follow Doré, I would just ask why it doesn't follow Doré, but rather than looking into other sources. And it's also, I would say, current limitations. We don't really know much about what, for example, Aloysius Beck collected. So I mean, at this point, I still think I would depend mainly on Doré first.
I saw a hand over on that side by the audience member. Yes, please.
Hi. Thanks. I was just wondering about the kind of wood that is being used to make the pagoda. Do you have any idea what kind of wood it is, and about the accessibility of the wood? Because I would assume they will have to purchase the wood, right? For them, and that would incur cost for the orphanage, you know. Yeah. So how, you know, about the materials? How do they get those material? Yeah. Thanks.
William or Antonio, you might be able to tell us more about this. But as far as I know, I really have no idea, you know, where they got the wood. But our conservators did tell me that in fact they're using two types of wood. They haven't told me what two types. Okay, but what our conservator told me is that for some that were unpainted, or only carved, they're using one type of wood. For those that are painted, they're using another type of wood. So they, in fact, I mean, depends on, you know, the actual finishing. So that's, because, I mean, to tell you, I mean, I'm not blaming on our conservators, but because time is really tight for us. So, I mean, after these objects came to Singapore, they were cleaned immediately, they were treated immediately, and then we moved to the exhibition. So they didn't really have a lot of time to conduct their research. I believe that maybe next year I can tell you what kind of wood that they're using, and then we can trace where they get them.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Lam. All right, our final speaker before lunch is Dr. Helena Motech, who will be presenting on a scroll made at Tushanwan that I believe is printed and then hand painted. So come on up.
Okay, what a sound. Hello to all of you, and first of all, I will join all the speakers before me in thanking the organizers. This is such a fabulously organized conference. I'm not sure if I've ever been on something that organized, so it's really, really well done. What I will be presenting here is actually just like an addition, an appendix to all the amazing scholarly work that you already heard about the Tushanwan workshops, and what I was working with was more or less one object, which shows you what an outreach these workshops had, sometimes a little bit unpredictable or also surprising. So just a backdrop to that. I come from Slovenia. Some of you maybe know it's a very small country, and this is what we always say. Whenever somebody asks you about Slovenia, we say, it's a very small country. We're a little bit obsessed by that. Yeah? We only have 2 million people, you know. But anyway, coming from a small country as you do, then sometimes we get too ambitious. And this framework for what I'm explaining here is actually more of a collective work, because we are working in something called VAZ, which is an overarching project 8 years ago, we said, okay, we have a lot of East Asian objects in Slovenian museums. And again, being in the center of Europe, this is not the first focus, so they're mostly in boxes, they're mostly hidden, they're mostly unresearched. So we said, of course, in 3 years, we can catalog all of them. And as it goes, of course, you don't. Yeah? So we keep on finding new ones. We keep on finding collections which are without provenance. We had, some of you maybe know, a very complicated political history in the 20th century. The confiscations, we'll be talking a little bit more about that later. So the provenance is very often missing. And in one of these objects I especially struggled with, actually brought me to Tushanwan stories. And the object is this one. It's a very not good format to put on PowerPoint slides. So it's a segment of it. It's a scroll, which is made out of print, but organized in a Chinese painting scroll shape. 3 prints, I will explain this a little bit later, but where it is, in a very unlikely place. It's in Celje Regional Museum. This is a small town in northeast Slovenia, and it's part of something called Asian and South American collection. Which just means these are the things we cannot put anywhere else, because we confiscated them in 1945 to 48. We have no idea where they come from, or we don't want to tell. This was all done by the secret police at the time. So we just put them in a museum because nobody wants them at home. Because anything that was confiscated and people wanted at home, they took it. So if it was a Persian carpet, it didn't end up in a museum. But a scroll like this, you can imagine nobody really knew what to do with it. So it ended up in a museum collection. And again, in Celje, I couldn't find any provenance, so who this was confiscated from. And there is no related objects. It's quite a big collection, but there's no objects which would be visibly related. So it's really unnerved me, okay? And then I got an information from also some of you sitting here, and I have to thank you again for all the help with that this is a Tushanwan object. So it was printed most probably in Tushanwan. And then I started exploring who could be in contact with that. So by doing that, I found a lot of other stories as well. And I will present 2 of them and then finish with the scroll. So the first contact that I will explain here with Tushanwan, it actually helps you understand that this was a very important institution, not only for the missionary context, but also for what you would call today travelers, sailors, all the people that were coming to Shanghai. Could we say maybe it was a tourist site? Okay, so the people from SMS, the ship Kaiserin Elizabeth, was the first story like this. This was an Austro-Hungarian Navy ship, what was called a station ship, so they would be going to Asia every time for 2 years. This was the last journey. They went on to sail in 1913. In 1914, they had some problems with the ship, so they had to stay in Shanghai for a month, and they also visited Tushanwan. And there were interesting people on this ship. 11 Slovenian officers and 11 sailors and officers. One of them was a ship intendant, and this is something that his name I really work with a lot because he's the owner. He was the owner of the biggest collection of Chinese objects in Slovenia. It's more than 500 objects. So if you happen to be in Slovenia in the next half year, very welcome to our exhibition. It's finally put on display after a lot of decades. But this crew also visited Tushanwan, either January 6th or the 9th, and this was recorded. It was a big deal, so it was recorded in a lot of journals, in Hungarian, in German, and in Slovenian, and this was a very low-ranking sailor, so it's not really high literature, but it's interesting to read. So just to read you one segment of that, he said, once we took a trip, but all but the most necessary crew on the ship, so it was a huge deal, to the French concession, which is the largest and stretches out from the city itself. We took the train 2 stations from Shanghai and then walked. The military band was with us as well. So imagine the scene, yeah? The destination of the trip was a visit to a French institution for the education of Chinese children whom the Chinese had abandoned and the missionaries picked up, which is quite an interesting expression. It's a very large complex of buildings. Inside there are all kinds of workshops and schools for every profession in the world. When we arrived, we were divided into groups of 10, and each group had its own guide through the building. So you see how well it was organized. It gives you an impression of how important site it was. Yeah? From this group, we have no objects. From the other sailors, we have 2 images and one, and William knows about this because we keep on nagging about whether you can say this is a Tushanwan object or not. 3 things from this kushek, so this huge collection, and these 2 photographs which might be from there. So if you have any ideas, please tell me afterwards in the coffee break if this could be a Tushanwan photograph, but nothing else, unfortunately. We do have 2 objects from Tushanwan in another collection, and this is also, each of these stories is a long and a fascinating one. But who she was, Alma Carlin was a world traveler. She went alone as a woman, traveling around the world, earning money as she went along. So it was really a crazy story. For 9 years she was traveling. She also visited Shanghai, and she also visited Tushanwan, but not only Tushanwan, so also the girls' part. And this is also interesting because she's a woman writer, very much into female sort of aspect of the stories. And you see that she describes it differently. She visited Shanghai in autumn 1923. And in this, she was a German speaker originally, so this was also published in German first. She says in her account, she said, tourists might admire the shops or the pagoda on the other side of the river. What seems more extraordinary to me is the French mission. It is where they embroider splendid mass cloaks and other items and receive commissions from all over the world. Orphans that enter the convent gradually learn this art of embroidery, in which Chinese are very skillful. They embroider while still children. When they grow up, when they become husbands and wives, she says men embroider as well, and they only stop when their eyes become cloudy like lanterns in the rain. I love this expression so much. Yeah? Some boys carve the famous Chinese cabinets from precious wood using ancient models. The children from wealthy families also enter this convent to study ordinary school subjects, and in times of famine, one can often find abandoned girls nearby. So we're now approximately 10 years later. Yeah? But what I want to focus on at the end is this object that I struggled with. And I already gave up. Some of you maybe have been, we had some sort of an online conference where I said, I'm not finding anything anymore about this one. Yeah? But what we did find is that this is actually a pasted combo of 3 printed images, which are also in the same size as Vassar's printed book. So I suppose it's actually an uncut version of the print. Hand-colored, so it's really, really beautifully made. And it's organized then in a scroll. So you see the 3 images. We have the joy of heaven, we have the death of the righteous. These are very common images, obviously. And the purgatory. And all come from the same publication, so all images from the Holy Scriptures. But then the provenance, which is usually the problem. Yeah? So how this scroll from Tushanwan could end at another side of the continents in a confiscated collection, okay? The only hint that we had was that there is a pencil inscription on the other side. It's in German, I hope, yeah? And it says, Mission Anstalt, something unreadable here in the second line, which I think could be some sort of a transliteration of Zekawe, because it starts with an S and an I. Yeah? By Shanghai, so near Shanghai. And then it says again Shanghai and a date. So May 3rd, 1883. And this is what becomes a problem. Because at this time, there were no Slovenians in China. And also, I tried finding some Slovenian missionaries that could be in Xujiahui. And except for this remark that you maybe saw at the end of the other quote, I couldn't find anybody. So who could have brought this, and this was not a collectible object, so who could have brought this scroll to Slovenia? And you see that at the end of this inscription, we have some sort of another word which we couldn't read really. Huh? And then Antonio will remember, because we were at the conference together. Last year, we had an EAAA conference in Tallinn. And these things sometimes happen really randomly. Huh? So a colleague from Ferenc Hoppe Museum in Budapest, the director, Ms. Fajczak, she had a talk on Josef Haas, who was a diplomat, and his connections to Ferenc Hoppe, who was, of course, the collector. The whole museum is made out of his collection in the Hungarian capital. And then she showed this image. And it's the portrait of Josef Haas. Josef Haas was a very important Austro-Hungarian diplomat in Shanghai. But what immediately caught my attention is the date. Because it says May 3rd, 1883. So it's like, all the lights went on, yeah? And then she started explaining, so why is this actually signed and marked? Because this was the time when these two people met. So they met in Shanghai for 3 days, between May 2nd and May 4th. Ferenc Hoppe was traveling around the world, collecting stuff, as he did. Josef Haas was a very welcoming person, so he welcomed any important visitor from Austria-Hungary. And he was, of course, a Hungarian. Yeah? So we see them here. And you know what you do when you meet somebody you don't know very well? You also exchange some gifts. And this is a very good conference to actually show the next picture at. Maybe Kevin will recognize what this is. Yeah? It's a brick. And this was a gift that was given to Hoppe. It's now in Ferenc Hoppe Museum. Yeah? It was given to Hoppe by Haas, some sort of a souvenir, and it's a brick from the porcelain pagoda that you also luckily showed before. I was waiting for it. Yeah? But you know what you do when, of course, you get a gift, you gift one back. So what I suppose is actually what we had there, because here it says this was given on May 2nd, 1883. It was given by Haas to Hoppe. Yeah? How do I go back? And this was probably the marking of another gift, which was given by Hoppe to Haas. Just one day after. And you see that what is there. How do I do it? This? It says Hoppe, of course. Yeah, so it's marking who gave the gift. Yeah? So it's a very random exchange if you look at it like this. Yeah? But why this helped me understand things? If we go a little bit further down, and this is now when we get into gossip part, okay? So how does a scroll like this end up in a confiscated place in a museum? It's because things go wrong, okay? So Josef Haas went swimming in 1896 in Ningbo, and he drowned, which was a shame. People loved him, yeah? So there's still a monument there and everything. And his wife, who was a very interesting, very intelligent woman, Eleonore Haas, also not a Slovenian, yeah? She had family in Mozirje. Mozirje is the tiniest possible place in North Slovenia, almost a village, a very small place, where she decided to return. But she didn't return just herself, but she brought the whole Haas collection with her. And it's, you see down here, this is how it looked like in a small house in Mozirje. So people were then dressing up as Chinese and stuff like that. Yeah? But also, of course, when she lived there, you see, for a long time. So from 1913, when she returned, until 1943. 1943 was just the time of German occupation in Slovenia. So Germans occupied Mozirje, and she decided, because she was a German speaker as well, that it would be maybe a little bit safer to move to Graz, which was on more the Austrian side of the occupied area. So she packed up the whole collection, but not really the whole collection, because not everything did fit in the house. Some of that she had stored in a chemical factory. It was actually a paint factory, which was owned by her relatives. So you just put the stuff there which you don't need. And again, probably the scroll was also there. Yeah? So when she packed all the bags, she just wanted to have the rest shipped after. With the bags packed, she died. She had a stroke, and she was gone. And then the family came from Austria to collect her stuff because the collection was very nice. Yeah? But they had no idea that there were still things in the factory. So the collection is gone and it's completely lost now. We don't know where it is. And it would be really interesting to see where it is because it was an amazing collection. But what was left in the factory was the unimportant stuff. And then the factory was confiscated. So this is how we got the scroll in a museum. So you see it's very random, yeah? I will put a stop here, enough gossip. So if there's any questions, please, yeah?
Thank you, Dr. Motok, for that very, very detailed look into provenance, into gift giving, into how this reveals certain social networks of a very particular time and place. I know you were starting to run out of time at the end there, but I was wondering if we could actually come back to the scroll itself. Can you tell us more about its production, if you know anything about it, why you think it looks the way it does, and maybe what are some of the future plans you might have for it in your museum or institute?
Well, the scroll itself, it's not unique. I've seen similar pieces in other museums. The combinations of different scenes, I couldn't really tell if there's a logic behind it. Maybe some of you know, if you studied that a little bit more, if there was a pattern of what was chosen, and especially I'm wondering what it was used for. So it was some sort of a teaching prop, I suppose, yeah? But was it something that you could also buy as an outsider? I haven't really seen that. So I'm not sure how that worked. It's what you see with very similar, and I've seen some almost the same scrolls in other collections. You see that they were, of course, printed the same way, but then hand-painted in different quality. So they're more or less elaborate, more or less nuanced, and then toned, and so on, and also not choosing the same colors. So you have saints in different sort of color combos. Which of course means that probably maybe they were not all done at the same time or by the same people and so on. There's a very similar collection but bigger format in Vienna as well, in the Weltmuseum. But otherwise in Europe there's less of it. So it's probably also due to the fact that this was not a collectible item. Yeah? I'm not part of the museum myself, so we only work with them as outsiders. But now it was on display for half year, but now it's back in storage. I have no idea for how long. Yeah.
Well, let's open it to the floor. Yes.
Thank you so much for this very fascinating paper, especially for me, because in Japan, in Sotobe area in Nagasaki, the hidden Christian places, we have a copy of this print. So the original prints, we have also just only a few pieces of original prints made in Shanghai, but Japanese reconverted hidden Christian. So now, Orthodox Catholics reproduced this print. Maybe you know about it. Maybe you.
I've seen some very not similar but related prints from Japan. I'm not sure if those are the same that you mean.
So I find very interesting is that in Japan, many of the subjects are just after death, or purgatory, inferno, or paradise, something like that. Because in Japan, the files of hidden Christians sometimes very, very altered, contaminated with Buddhism, Shintoism. So to reconvert hidden Christians to Orthodoxy, also to reconstruct the notion of after death to hidden Christians. The missionaries of the Mission étrangère de Paris. Really utilized these images. So my question is that, have you noticed any characteristics regarding the subjects of these prints that you have in Slovenia?
I'm not sure if I understood.
My question is, have you noticed any characteristics regarding the subjects, regarding the iconography of the print that you have in Slovenia?
Well, unfortunately, we only have this one. So nothing to compare it with. And again, as I said, also there are of course missionary collections, but this is this type of objects, because there's mostly Franciscans that were bringing other things in. It's a completely different story. So it's very difficult to compare with this one. No.
Any other questions? Looks like maybe we are all eager to get to lunch.
Lunch.
I think in the interest of time, if it's okay with you, why don't we just move into the panel discussion?
Because we have the
can
discussion anyway.
put all of our papers in conversation with each other.
Thank you very much. Can I invite the two of you to please join us at the right side as we prepare the stage for the panel discussion for the third panel on the Tushanwan workshops. So we're going to set up the chairs before we invite all our speakers back to join us once again. So don't be shy, okay? So this is a great chance for everybody to ask some questions. So once again, we do have Dr. Antonio de Caro from University of Zürich, Dr. William Ma from Louisiana State University, as well as Dr. Kevin Lam as well from the ACM to join us on stage together with Dr. Moto, and also our moderator, Dr. Patricia Yu as well. All right, so can I invite our speakers to please kindly take a seat as we move on now to our panel on the Tushanwan workshops, the cradle of modern Chinese art. So Dr. Yu, please.
Yeah, all right. I don't want to take up too much time, so I'm just going to open up the floor to questions. Yes, the gentleman in the center.
Hi, I've got two questions. The first one is not specific to Tushanwan, but it can be any other workshop, and it's about fakes, right? So when we look at something that's made in the 17th, 18th, 19th century, how do you know that it was the genuine article and not a fake article, right? Because when we look at it from our perspective, it is an antique, but it's not a fake antique as in someone trying to make it now in today's context of something that was made based on something that was made in, say, the 17th century, but rather it was an antique fake. So that's the first question. How do we know the veracity or the authenticity of that product?
Usually, if they're consciously making fake, there's a market for it. I don't think there's a market so far for fake Tushanwan objects yet.
But maybe not specific to Tushanwan, but because there were other workshops as well. How do you know they were fake or the real thing?
I mean, I think there are a lot of ways to tell. For example, like inspecting the objects, where it comes from, and every time that's like why we conduct research on specific objects. Through textual records, through the object itself, studying the object itself. I would say, we have to take it case by case. It depends on each object, on what kind of object that you're talking about.
Okay. Second question could be more specific to Tushanwan because they produce catalogs. So, and as you know, that when things are handmade, the quality there's probably a wide range. So how do you know that when we look at a product and it compares with identical products made or they were supposed to be made, how do you know that it's not defective or the quality compared to identical or similar items in the catalog? For instance, somebody showed at yesterday's presentation that the coat of arms that was actually printed or hand painted upside down. Yeah.
The short answer is you don't. Unless you're actually in Shanghai inspecting everything. For example, the big China Pavilion project, Leopold II actually have somebody there to inspect, make sure everything's doing well. And it was also a very big royal project, so they do make sure everything's okay. But I've looked at enough Tushanwan project, even the one that was sent to Pan Pacific, the quality is sort of all over the place. The large screens are very beautiful, intricately carved, and very convincing details. But there was also 2 camphor boxes that I found in a flea market. I sort of associate it. I found it's from the exhibition, and the figures look terrible. Right? So maybe I had to do with size and the type of objects and all of that. But yeah, you don't basically.
If I may, a third question and my last question. Sorry.
I am going to, in the interest of time, I'm going to allow other audience members to ask a question. So please, madam.
Thank you, thank you. I was just wondering, at that point of time, what was the thinking of the priest who ran the orphanage behind the choice of making pagoda for the children? Because I would think that if in the religious context, they would choose to make crosses and churches and candlestick, religious things rather than pagodas. So what governed the thinking behind the choice of pagodas?
Yeah, maybe I think that like one main idea was to actually train those orphans in order to give them specific skills. And actually in Xujiahui, you will have various levels of skills that people will acquire. The Jesuits were very meticulous in choosing people, and they had catalogs when they had all people, for example, will join the Society of Jesus, would be members of the Society of Jesus, or will start the novitiate, and they would catalog with their names. And next to the name, they will say something like, this person is of a good spirit, so he can do this, etc. And I think that like on a more informal level, as already mentioned by William before, they did this for orphans as well. The image production was important for 2 reasons, in my opinion. The first one is because they needed to decorate churches, quite simply. So even Nicola Massa, who wasn't that good of a painter, nevertheless painted oil on canvas paintings because they were needed. The second idea is that they wanted to convey a sort of continuity between, which we can also see here, actually in the scenes here, between what is called the old Society of Jesus and the new Society of Jesus, where there were people like Matteo Ricci in the early modern era, in the late Ming Dynasty, who gifted European paintings to the Chinese Emperor Wan Li, for example, and were involved in various ways into the production in situ of Chinese Christian art. The missionaries in Xujiahui, I think, wanted to do something similar because they felt that they wanted to be somehow in continuity with that mission.
They made many kind of, for example, like the things that you mentioned, religious sculpture for sure, they did as well. Candlesticks, they did as well. And to talk about, why they made pagodas, this is like really mysterious question. I think for this particular set, what we know, as William, you have found it out, it was probably commissioned by a German university or museum for educational purpose. And because of mysterious reason, we didn't know why it didn't work out. This still didn't work out. And then so the Jesuit orphanage, the Tushanwan workshop, they organized to have this all shipped over to San Francisco to find a buyer so that they can recover the cost. So yeah.
I also want to add, context matters, right? They are exhibited, they're intended for Pan Pacific, which is a large trade fair, right? So it wouldn't make sense for them to make Catholic or Gothic altars, and they're speaking to a group of international audience. Actually, many of them in America quite hostile to Catholics, so they want to advertise them. In fact, there were actually originally they included a lot of Catholic sort of carved saints that local Protestant actually protested, saying that this is not a religious fair. Please get rid of these saints, which also tells me that these Buddhist pagodas were not considered religious, but rather as a type of architecture to show off the skills of the orphans.
But Dr. Wang, I see you have
very quick. I think the full paper makes a wonderful panel on the what we call the economy of observation. My question departs from my observation on the architecture, Catholic ecclesiastical architecture, 19th century, when we think China is unique, but which is not. There's a strong pro-Gothic, sentiment among architects in China who built French-style Gothic church, but also in Vietnam and other parts of Asia. I wonder whether this kind of production and of artifacts was a sole phenomenon exists in China, or it was connected to some other places in Asia. What's this larger picture behind it? Thank you very much.
Specifically in regards to the pagodas, or
yes. Well, like workshop exists in other parts of Asia, also supplied European and the US market by the time.
I know that, there are other workshops in China at that time organized by these different missionaries. But in other parts of Asia, I honestly have no idea if they actually exist. What I know is this Tushanwan workshop, the prototype, was certainly from France. So is that like French missionaries, they set up similar workshops in other places? That I have no idea. Do you have any?
So either in my article or in my dissertation, I don't remember when I said this now, I actually integrated with the larger discussion of a global sort of architectural history that's been generated by Ferguson and Warshman, right? So there is this urge to to showcase the type of real monuments that China has, right? So which I argue that this is actually the Jesuits' effort and contribution to present China with real monuments, real permanent architectures in a systematic architectural way, right? While we today may not see it as accurate, Liang Sicheng, in fact, actually did not see it as accurate. But I think at the time, it was the first of its sort of effort to showcase these as architecture. On the other hand, the reception was that people did not understand and still did not see pagoda as a respectable architectural form. They only see it as these ornamental, oriental tchotchkes, basically, right?
All right, I think in the interest of time, I'm going to end it here and release us to lunch. Thank you so much to panel number 3 for starting this day off.
Thank you to our moderator as well, Dr. Patricia Yu. Can we take a group photo? If we can invite our speakers to please kindly stand forward. But once again, Dr. Antonio de Caro, Dr. William Ma, Dr. Kelvin Lam, Dr. Helena Moto, as well as our moderator, Dr. Patricia Yu. Thank you very much.